So your mind at work, under the hood, session 9. Here we go. So just a quick reminder, way back in October, we talked about mindfulness, and thank goodness we did, because everything else that's followed on afterwards is really coming back to mindfulness, attention, and focus. And then to the middle of the season, we did drama and uncertainty and expectations. And then the last few sessions, we've looked at collaborating with others, enemies and friends, fairness and status. And today, how we influence people to change, because change in the brain is constant. You know, it's the last Your Mind at Work season 1 episode that I'm actually going to be doing. Of course, Jane is going to do one next week. But I always feel sad when I come to the end of a season. As I was saying before, you know, this isn't the first time I've run one of these gigs, but I do find it a great deal of fun, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. And we'll see what happens next year, which I might allude to right at the end of this. So the human brain, it really makes you think, doesn't it? The theme for everything that we've done has to be these responses that are immediate in the brain, whether they are the toward responses, looking for primary rewards, which makes us curious, happy, or contented, or whether it's those away responses or the primary threats that are life-threatening and cause us to be anxious, sad, and fearful. But the whole Your Mind at Work under the hood is really all about mindfulness and the way that we feel and the way that we respond. So today, we're going to talk about constant change and what we can do about it when we're talking to individuals one-on-one. That's the first half. And then we're talking about change when we're trying to change a group or maybe even a culture. So let's get into it. Why is change so hard? Who's going to throw me a bone and tell me why change is so hard? No.
Victoria raised her hand.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I was going to say, as humans, we have habits, right? We get used to habits. So, and once we get used to habits, we get comfortable with it. So changing those habits becomes uncomfortable and feels like a threat. Hence the reason that we kind of immediately resist to change.
Very cool, very cool. And for those of you who remember the SCARF model, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, it's that lack of certainty. In the very words that Victoria just said, we get so comfortable with life that when somebody comes along like Pete in irritating mode and says to Chris, oh, I want to change something. Well, the human reaction is, do we have to? Because I like what we're doing at the moment, because I know what we're doing. But today is less about your brain, more about how to apply what we've learned in the Your Mind at Work sessions to changing others.
Sorry, Pete, one of the other things I wanted to add to it, because I wasn't sure, is like we're afraid, and this is kind of, Victoria said, we're kind of afraid of the unknown.
Yeah. And
sometimes change isn't instant. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes us, you know, you've got to put something into it in order to change. And I think we're, as Victoria said, comfortable with doing things. And especially now, we're more of a society that instant gratification, right? So we're not patient to kind of go through it. And then I also think sometimes we're afraid of failing.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of when you go through, and
which is status.
Yeah. So if that doesn't work, and then kind of on that status, well, what are other people going to think? Yeah. You know, you may just change your hair color or you cut it. Well, what will other people think of it? And sometimes it's just like, you're afraid to do things on your own. Like if you have other people with you, okay, that's better. But if you're going to do it kind of all by yourself, then it's that motivation to try to do it. If you have others pushing you along, sometimes I think that's when change becomes more difficult. But
yeah. Many reasons. My dear friend ChatGPT, I politely asked, well, what's facilitating change this morning? And it came back with, well, it's the process of guiding and supporting individuals, teams, or organizations in navigating and implementing a desired transformation or transition. But the key part that I really liked was the role of a facilitator in this context is to assist in removing obstacles, promoting understanding, and empowering stakeholders to embrace and drive the change effectively. So continuing with ChatGPT, who is actually going to replace me next year. No, he's not. Overall, facilitating change involves guiding stakeholders through the various stages of change, from initial awareness and understanding to adoption and integration. The facilitator acts as a catalyst, supporting individuals and groups to embrace change, navigate challenges, and ultimately achieve the desired outcomes. Now, doesn't all this sound wonderful? It's like a how-to. Just go away and do that. Go and facilitate some change. Do it this afternoon. Don't hesitate. But that is why understanding how the mind processes and reacts to the thought of change is so critical if we're to act as facilitators of change. You can provide guidance and expertise, you can engage stakeholders, you can build consensus and buy-in, you can manage resistance, you can do all of those things from 1 to 7, which good old ChatGPT spat out at me this morning. But the point is this: why? Why do we do those things? Because of what's going on in people's heads. That's why we do it. It's not just enough to say, well, go and provide some guidance and expertise then. Or why don't you manage some resistance? Or why don't you go and monitor progress and adjust course if you need to? Well, that's all great. But we're doing it because of what's going on in people's heads. That's what we've got to be aware of. And where do we ever get training for this? If I had $1 for every article on LinkedIn that purports to tell you how to be the next greatest leader of all time, when have I ever seen one that talks about, by the way, this is all related to what's going on in everybody's heads because of the way that the human brain works? Not very often. So anyway, what affects the human brain? Well, we know that there are external factors, there are distractions, there is noise, there is all sorts of things because we can't focus. And we also know that shifting attention changes the brain as well, either from a reward to a threat or a threat to a reward. But we know that that's how it works. So this is the point today. The biggest challenge in creating real lasting change in individuals or groups is about shifting attention, what we give our mindfulness and our focus to, from a threat to a reward. And remember, the human brain, being the way that it is, automatically defaults to threat rather than reward. That is a proven fact. So one of the ways that we can work one-on-one with an individual to facilitate change is through feedback. Giving others feedback is often the first strategy people use when they want to facilitate change in an individual. Why might this be a problem?
Because people think that feedback is a threat to them, or they might not want to hear it, or
Exactly.
And it's more about what you think they should change rather than what they think they should change.
Exactly. Feedback, it in itself creates a strong threat for people in most situations, even in people who ask for feedback, because the lingering fear and the default of the brain is, well, I really want to know how I'm doing, but it's probably going to be bad. So it generates a threat response. So let me tell you what others have been saying about you is one of the fastest, easiest, and most consistent ways of making someone deeply anxious. But we need to know this, because when we talk about coaching and mentoring people, what are we doing? We're giving them feedback. So we've got to figure out ways in which we can reduce the threat of giving feedback. Why? All right, I'll answer this one. Let's talk about performance reviews as my example. Managers are taught or told to give constructive performance feedback to all their direct reports. It doesn't matter how nicely you dress it up, feedback always packs a punch. And because of that, the result is that most feedback conversations result in people defending themselves. Chris and I have got a classic example of this. Over the last few weeks, we've been listening to some of the recorded calls from our agents on our service desk. And we've created meetings whereby we go and we listen to the calls together and we talk about what was working well and where were there opportunities to do something different. And certainly for the first few weeks, the default position of a certain number of the agents was, well, I want to tell you why I did that, or that happened because, or. They went completely and utterly into defending themselves or making the case for the defense, as Chris and I call it. Am I lying, Chris?
You never lie.
No.
No.
So
True.
When it comes to annual reviews, I'm going to say today that on average, most companies who still do those archaic things called annual performance reviews are actually losing 6 days of productivity every year. So because there's 3 days preparing for the actual annual performance review when everybody desperately tries to remember what on earth they said 12 months ago. And then there's 3 days recovering because people feel really bad because the feedback that was given put them into a threat response and they didn't like what they heard. Not that I'm trying to be controversial. So
Add to that,
the alternative?
Can I add one more thing to that? In my experience, one organization I worked with was everyone knew that when it came to performance reviews, that your manager will only remember events that have occurred in the last maybe 6 weeks, right? And, it's based on, their near-term memory of what's been occurred. So everyone tries to be on their best behavior just before, about 2 months before performance reviews. Everyone goes out of the way to be on their best behavior. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, how very, very true. So what's an alternative to feedback? Well, an alternative to feedback is problem solving together. So one of the ways you can problem solve is to look at a root cause analysis. This is really simple in some cases. So for example, why did the car break down? Well, the radiator overheated. That's nice and easy. We can understand the problem. We can do something about it. We can change and hopefully prevent that from happening again in the future. When software malfunctions, we can go and look at the code. It's very linear and we can figure out what's done wrong and make corrections. So that's all about change as well. When you have a system failure, it's all the same. Linear systems are very rational, very logical, and very safe. The problem that we face is when you get to talking about problem solving with humans, it becomes very complex and dynamic, and there are a lot of sensitivities involved. Chris has probably heard me say this, and I wish I hadn't sometimes. Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. In other words, the inference there is that something needs to change, but I am going to let you tell me what the change should be. Or sometimes, as happens very often in the workplace, somebody's very keen to tell us, here's a problem, but they're not actually very keen to tell us what we should do about fixing it in the sense of, here's a solution. So it's a double-edged sword. Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions can be interpreted in a negative way, but it's also a good thing in the sense that you're trying to get the individuals that you want to change to think it through themselves and start suggesting things back. When it comes to solutions and problems are always going to be perceived as or will generate the threat response, which can make people unhappy emotionally. When it comes to a solution, if people believe that they've done something right, they've created something, that generates a reward response through the insights that individuals can have, and that makes people happy. So if you can achieve change through letting the people most involved in the change give you the solution, it's actually a way of moving people away from a threat towards a reward. But what do you think is the downside of you, the manager, making suggestions and proposing solutions to an individual that you want to change. So now it's not about feedback anymore. A problem or a requirement for a change is generated, and now we as managers say, whoa, Chris, just go away and do this. What do you think the potential downside is of that?
The manager is coming from their own perspective, so they may not be able to identify all the challenges that the employee actually has. And so it's that top-down approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. The more you are the one proposing the solution or making a suggestion to an individual, the more the brain reacts in a similar way to feedback. In other words, it's another threat response. Now Pete's telling me what to do. Oh my God. The more your ideas will be discounted. And this is why change fails to a large extent, because managers think they know the answer. Chris tells me this all the time. I don't know why, but he does. But managers always think they know the answer, but you've got to stop yourself before you actually make that suggestion, because you're basically, because it's coming, employ a different tactic to facilitate change in an individual. So what can we do? Well, let's look at the old SCARF model again. Remember, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Those away threats and those toward rewards. What we want to do, I thought this was intensely clever, by the way, when I read the book that I'm going to reveal the name of today. We want to move away from constructive performance feedback, CPF, to facilitating positive change, FPC. Look, see, even the letters are the other way around. Isn't that brilliant? So we're going to take away the threat and we're going to convert it into a reward. So raise people's status by implicitly saying, you have good ideas, patting them on the back, and ask them questions like this. Do you think you know what you need to do to resolve this? Well, that's a yes/no answer, which isn't necessarily open-ended, but it will start the thought process of, crikey, what should I do next? Do you have any hunches about what needs to be done to change this? How close to a solution are you? What's the best path to follow here to get to there? Let's explore your ideas on this. So giving the ownership and the accountability in a positive way to the individual. People are actually capable of giving themselves feedback and talking themselves through a scenario, providing and especially if their status is not threatened. That's the piece we've got to take away. Feedback is a threat to status. Problem solving is a threat to status. Me telling Chris how to do his job is a threat to Chris's status. But if we can remove the fall in status away from the change that we want to create, we have a better chance of facilitating that change. So facilitate and encourage reward responses to create positive change and insights. That's the key learning point of working with individuals. So giving feedback often creates an intense threat response that doesn't help people improve performance. The problem-solving approach may not be the most effective. Providing suggestions often results in a lot of wasted time because your ideas are being discounted, even though you think they're absolutely brilliant. Catch yourself when you go to give feedback, problem solve, or provide solutions, and find a way to make it valuable for people to give themselves feedback, self-analyze, and reward them for being mindful in this way. So
Sorry, can I go back to the problem that you and Chris kind of said, hey, you know, you were listening through on the recordings for like your call center people. And I know you talked through, so I'm not making an assumption of how you did it. Did you maybe just play a couple of the things back to them and say, hey, you know what, now you've got a chance to listen. Is there anything you would have done differently? Is that kind of how you approach that, or?
Well, Chris is a champion at this, and I'll let him speak to it. But the first thing is, how do you think you did? Is one of Chris's first questions.
Yeah, that's right. So we do listen alongside. So they do hear the call from top to bottom. We let it play through, and then we kind of highlight points as we go. And it's not all about the negative either. We definitely recognize positive behaviors. But yeah, they do listen to it live, and that's the very first thing we ask. Actually, before we listen to the call, we say, "How did you do this week? Like, have you made any changes that you did that we recommended previous weeks, and so on?" And they explain some of the things they've tried, and then we go ahead and listen, and then yeah, that's basically how it goes. And they say no. Now hearing it back again, I could tell that this was a little, the dead air was a little too long, or maybe I was not speaking clearly enough, offered clear direction. So so they often hear what they can improve, and they pick up on those things without having us having to explain it. So yeah.
I think that's a key thing, though, is that because we're not always fortunate enough to be able to play something back.
Right.
We don't record everybody in every single situation. Well, I was going to say nowadays, I guess more people do it, but we're not always doing that. So I think that's a great opportunity. I know I've used that with some of my music students, because I'll say, hey, you know what? You held this too long. No, I didn't. So then it's the power of, oh, well, I just recorded you. Okay, you're right. And they can find some of those things. I think that is really, really key. One question, and maybe put it out to everybody, because I like, even when you said, how do you think you did? Sometimes when I get that question, I'm like, you're waiting for me to say everything was bad, and now you think it's bad. So I don't know, even on the flip side, how do you kind of monitor that, even though maybe what you're saying is, hey, you did a great job this week. So how do you twist that as well, from making it feel like it's not, well, how'd you do this week? And now we're going to pull apart everything I did wrong.
Well, because we in this particular example, we give the airtime for them to tell us how wonderful they are too. It's not one-sided. So, how do you think you did this week becomes, well, I was really good at the greeting because I focused on it last week based on our call review last week. So that's great. But then actually, I think there's a little bit too much dead air. So you're actually getting them to say, next week, I'm probably going to have to work on the dead air, those long silences when the tech's going and actually doing something, but nobody knows because it's a phone call what's actually being done. So, it's this idea of having them tell me and Chris, this is probably the area I need to work on, as opposed to Chris and Pete saying, well, there's a lot of dead air there.
Yeah.
And to add to that, when we finish the session, Pete usually says, you know what, we're not looking for perfection, but we're looking for signs of improvement and willingness to improve from your part. So we just want to know that you're trying, and that means a lot to us. So that usually leaves the session fairly positive, that we see some progression. Yes, we're calling out some opportunities, but all in all, you are improving week over week. And that's usually how we end the sessions when applicable.
Yeah, I like how you use that word opportunities as well. You called out some opportunities, and not like, hey, you have to change this. It's just opportunities. So
right, suggestions. And yeah.
Thanks.
Kelly, may I have your permission to continue?
Yes, you may. Sorry.
Thank you so much. I'm pulling your leg. All right, transforming culture. Changing your own behavior is very hard, as we all know. Changing other people's behavior is even harder. Now, of course, in the good old days, somebody would have come along and said, oh, well, you just need a carrot and a stick, don't you? Dangle a reward in front of them, give them a threat, and they'll, pull together and everything will be fine and everything will be different. Well, it doesn't really work like that. So what changes the human brain, as we know, is attention, focus, and mindfulness, because through that, the brain builds new maps and new networks, and we think differently. So the only time that the carrot and the stick can succeed in focusing attention in the right way to create change, but it's the focus, not the carrot or the stick, that is creating the change. Does that make sense? Sometimes the carrot and the stick can succeed, but it's because of the focus that they generate. It's not because there's a carrot and a stick. Hopefully that'll become clearer in a minute. So what changes the human brain? When you're talking about change for a group of individuals, we do have to recognize that everybody's different. So what can we do to focus people's attention? Because ultimately, of course, like this photograph of an orchestra, you're dealing with individual units that we have to make sure are in sync with all the other units. If you're talking about a group or a team or even a culture that you want to change. The only way you can do it is by generating these different brain maps in the approach that you take, so that you work together and you form a pattern as a unit, which is not easy, but it's something you have to aspire to. Now, the power of focus, I did want to mention this today, not just because we were talking about French cheeses at the very start of this call, but when I was a young lad, which was a very long time ago, I was actually parachuted into France to go to school because everybody who I spoke to thought it would be really good for me. The interesting thing about that was I didn't speak French. So I had to literally go, and I wouldn't say I was starting from scratch, because I did have a kind of a little, phrase book telling me all the important things, like where's the bus and things like that. But other than that, I really didn't know French at all. The only way that I actually learned it was because I had to. I had to give it all my attention, sitting in classes, socializing after class, going to a cafe, climbing the Bastille in Grenoble, whatever I was doing, it had to be in French. So today's quiz, who can translate that sentence for me? Does anybody speak French on this call other than me?
Yes.
Go on.
The reason that I succeeded in speaking French is because, oh wait, la raison pour laquelle j'ai bien réussi à parler français couramment, et la raison pour laquelle je n'ai, oh yeah, okay, so the reason I haven't forgot it was, keep going.
No, there is no more. So,
oh.
No, you were there, Chris, you were there. With a name like Saint-Pierre, he ought to know the
Yeah.
answer, don't he? So it's how I got to speak French fluently, and the reason I've never forgotten it is what that says.
Yes.
Because of the power of focus. And I was in a position, well, I guess it was a kind of a stick and a carrot at the same time. I really had no choice. But the fact is, in 3 months, I went from 0 to fluent, and it took about 3 months. But that focus, that power of focus was there all the time. So all you need to do to change a culture, whether at home or at work, is to focus other people's attention in new ways long enough. But it's also really difficult. It's not easy. You need to find something that the brain wants. And I can tell you, and I'm going to talk about this right at the very end of this session again, the thing that the brain really wants that will reduce threats and create rewards is none other than safety. That's what we need to do. We need to make change safe. Find the ways that people understand and embrace the change, because to them it's safe. That's the key to changing the threat response to a reward response. So if you think about the power of focus with the SCARF model and the toward rewards, status involves positive public recognition. Certainty means you share more information and you be as transparent as possible about the change that you're trying to create. Autonomy means more flexible working arrangements or less reporting requirements. In other words, giving the people that you want to change the power and the control that feels more like they're self-managing than being managed. Relatedness is giving people time to attend conferences or peer networking groups at Tech Connects, because you're relating to other people, relating to issues that hopefully people have got in common. And then fairness, well, just an example of that, community days to go and help a charity of choice, or the Windsor office of Next Dimension had a cleaning up of the parking lot on the adjacent gardens the other day, and everybody mucked in and did that. It's the way that you create rewards, to create the dopamine and get away from the anxiety of threats. Great leaders do it like this. By the way, Gandhi and Nelson Mandela have always been great leaders to me. I must admit, I don't know enough about Abraham Lincoln to know whether he was a great leader or not. So see me afterwards and let me know. Great leaders are often humble. Definitely can say that about Gandhi and Nelson Mandela, reducing the status threat and creating a sense of safety in others. Great leaders talk a lot about the future and provide clear expectations to increase certainty. Great leaders let others take charge and make decisions, increasing autonomy. What do you think, Chris? What should we do about that? Great leaders are authentic and real with other people, creating a sense of relatedness. I think you could probably say that about me, in the sense that you get to see the real Pete. What you see is what you get. There's no airs and graces. I am what I am. And, you know, hopefully people can relate to that. Hopefully. Great leaders keep their promises, taking care to be perceived as fair. That's really, really important, because fairness creates trust. Trust takes a long time to build, but can be destroyed in a second, as we know. So safety and creating a sense of safety is the first step in transforming a culture, whether the culture involves 2 people at home or 20,000 at work. Safety first. There you go. Safety first, to create the reward responses. And we're going to visit safety again in Your Mind at Work Season 2. Oh, shameless plug. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So now here's 3 ideas. Can I have your attention, please? Says the man on the left. But the brain is so easily distracted. Anybody who's tried to meditate for the very first time will know that within 5 to 6 seconds of you trying to think of nothing at all, you start thinking of something. The brain gets distracted, you wander off, and if you're trying to meditate, you try and bring yourself back, and 5 seconds later, off it goes again, and you're thinking about something, or you're imagining something, or you're seeing an image, and then you bring yourself back and you say, come on, let's meditate. And your brain goes, yes, but by the way, and then off it takes you again. The brain is so easily distracted. However, we can also use that to our advantage. It's not that hard to distract people from other thoughts and focus them on something new, because we are so easily distracted. So one of the ways that we can do that is tell people a story. Stories have a point, specific ideas at their core, characters and events that the storyteller wants others to understand. And this is how we can hold people's attention, because this is what we're trying to do. By holding people's attention, we make the change more palatable. So tell a story. Ask the right questions. Ask questions to focus attention by getting people to close gaps. What would it take for you to do this more often? What would it take for us to improve the way our customers think about us? What would it take for us to become more efficient and avoid rework? And then establish the right goals. So storytelling, asking questions, establishing the right goals. So set goals to focus attention by raising the prospect of a reward and raising status by giving others small achievements to notice along the path to change. So, you know, you break down in a Gantt chart, maybe there's a beginning and an end to a project, for example, and then there are 10 discrete steps which all happen at a certain point in time, sometimes linear, sometimes they happen at the same time. But if the steps are small enough that you can show a victory, a reward, a gain, something we did collectively, hey, we're making progress, then you're generating the reward response and raising individual status. So a series of small steps as opposed to one big step can generate the change and reduce the threat. So the summary for this section would be, while human change appears hard, change in the brain is constant, and we have to bring that into our mindfulness when we think about changing other people. Attention goes all too easily to the threat. I think that's one of the most important things to remember about Your Mind at Work this year, that we automatically default to the threat. So it takes work to shift ourselves and to shift others to the reward response. And practice watching for people's emotional state when you want to facilitate change, because the emotions of threat are a dead giveaway if you can spot them. And then you know that the change is being resisted, that maybe if you're suggesting a certain way forwards, it's being discounted, and that people feel generally anxious. So that concludes Your Mind at Work Season 1 Under the Hood. And now, of course, it's time for the big reveal, because as I've said consistently, everything that I've spoken about this time around has been from a book we've effectively serialized, because, you know, I'm not brainy enough to think of this stuff on my own. But before we do that, today we have a quiz. Kelly, because she wouldn't give me a long service award for all my years of service to Tech Connect, said, I'll tell you what, Pete, instead of that, we'll do a quiz. I said, well, how's that a reward? She says, well, I'll test your knowledge and see if you can remember anything that you've said over the last 9 months in your mind at work. Okay, Kelly, are you ready?
I'm good.
All righty, here we go. Question 1.
Hey, Pete, what continues to work even after it's fired?
A neuron?
Correct. 1 out of 1. Hey, Pete, next question. What did the hippocampus say during its retirement speech?
Thanks for the memories.
Very good. 2 out of 2. What is the brain's favorite TV channel?
Oh, I know this one, the neural network.
Nicely done. 3 out of 3. When does the brain get afraid?
When it loses its nerve.
Perfect. There you go. Next one. When does it rain brains?
During a brainstorm.
That's a good one. 5 out of 5. Okay. And what do you call an empty skull?
A no-brainer.
Perfect. Well
I'm so
done,
relieved.
Pete.
Yeah, it proves that I've learned something along the way as well. All righty, now to the big reveal. Finally, the book is called Your Brain at Work, not Your Mind at Work, but Your Brain at Work. So strategies for overcoming distraction, regaining focus, and working smarter all day long by Dr. David Rock. I can't recommend this book strongly enough to anybody who wants to understand themselves and the people who they surround themselves with, either at work or elsewhere. It's available on Amazon. It doesn't cost that much, and it's a really great read. We changed some of the names as part of Your Mind at Work, but some of the scenarios that we went through are straight from the book, and it really is an excellent read. But whatever you think of the book, just remember, I did it my way. Yeah, baby. Here's a reminder, don't be mad at lazy people. They didn't do anything. Change management at work next Wednesday on June the 28th at 8:30. Jane, as she has heroically done throughout the last 9 months, will try and make sense of all the crazy stuff that I talk about and make it practical and meaningful. And she's done a superb job of it throughout this year. So please join us on Wednesday at 8:30 for Jane's final session in season 1. But we will be back. Your Mind at Work season 2 is coming your way. Wait until you see this. Your Mind at Work season 2 is called The Professional Jigsaw. So we have an 18-piece puzzle that we think is required to have a professional culture, for the skills that are required to contribute to a professional culture. And the way that we looked at it was like this. The professional jigsaw, like any jigsaw, the pieces of the puzzle and the shapes have to be fitted together to give a complete picture. So the picture in our puzzle is one of being a professional in today's business world. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether you are self-employed, in a startup, working in a small to medium business, or in big corporate. How can you make the pieces of the puzzle work for you? So Jane and I have split the 18 pieces of the puzzle between us, 9 pieces each. And that's what we're going to be talking about. We'll launch it in September. And then in October, I'll talk about safety. Ooh, no wonder I mentioned that before. And Jane will talk about listening, and then we'll work our way through the 18 pieces of the puzzle. So please join us. I know you'll never remember this, but we'll send reminders. Please join us on Thursday, September the 21st at 12 noon. Well, it should actually be 6 p.m. in France, but that doesn't matter. When Jane and I will co-host a Your Mind at Work Season 2 launch. Not lunch. And Pete also promises fewer pictures of brains this year. So that might be encouraging to some people as well.